So now I would like everyone to please pick up a paddle, get into a canoe or kayak, and join me now on rivers around the world. And as we float downstream, keep this thought in mind. My son Derek is standing at a podium in the middle of the Rio Grande. He is tweaking a well-known quote. Ask not what this river can do for you, but what you can do for this river. These are the arteries within my body and within all of your bodies. And these are the rivers of New Mexico. We are water. Our bodies hold streams: sweat, blood, tears, urine. Water enters, circulates within us, and leaves. Each of us is part of the hydrologic cycle. We tend to think of that as something out there, but it involves all of us. We're all interconnected. Each of us is a walking river, sloshing along with damp insides held together by a paper-thin skin. While we are looking at this map of New Mexico rivers, it is important to mention that just a few days ago, American Rivers listed the Gila River in the south of New Mexico, which is the last major free-flowing river, as America's most endangered river for 2019. It is threatened due to lack of snowpack runoff, since the Southwest is hotter and drier, due to climate disruption, and because of a costly proposed diversion project. Our water future will depend upon a commitment to creative actions, constellations of diversity, collaboration and cooperation, community and culture, compassion. This is a word that in academic circles we tend not to hear very often, and yet is incredibly important. Conservation and communication. I photographed this woman bringing water from the Narmada River in India at dawn. Around the world, women are traditionally the carriers of water, having to walk for hours to a source that is often highly polluted. Global refugees have been forced to flee cities with infrastructure that has been destroyed. And then in refugee camps, there's the constant struggle to find enough water to survive. All of us rely on water, from the smallest ant to this magnificent friend of mine in the Rapti River in southern Nepal, who is infected with schistosomiasis. It's also called bilharzia. I do believe, very, very strongly, that rivers are just as alive as we are. This has been confirmed recently by laws stating that rivers have been granted the same legal status as a person. The Maori in New Zealand have fought for 140 years to have their ancestral river, the Wanganui, given legal rights as a living entity, meaning that if anyone harms or pollutes the river, the law would view it as no different than harming a person. I had the privilege recently at the law school to talk with the Honorable Christopher Finlayson, who worked closely with the Maori tribe to make this happen. This is the Rio Grande, down near Socorro several summers ago, which has become nothing but a river of sand. Imagine if this would be what most of the world's rivers would look like one day. Although I have to say, showing this picture, if any of you have been walking down by the river the past few days, the CFS, which is cubic feet per second, is up around 3,000. It's really high. It's breaching its banks. It's wonderful to see from all this rain and all the snow melt that we've received this year. It is important to know where our water comes from. In Western cultures, we often take water for granted. We get up each day, take a shower, brush our teeth, flush the toilet, without much thought where that water comes from and how grateful we need to be for every single drop. The Gathering of Waters projects connect people by handing a canteen and a logbook, person to person, along the entire length of a river. And there is someone in the audience who participated in this a while ago, and I'm so happy that they're here tonight. These actions are not about planning seminars in boardrooms or endless discussions indoors in offices. It requires getting one's feet wet, experiencing this body of water firsthand. The gatherings help to establish ongoing networks and partnerships, both upstream and downstream. The canteen and logbook travel the river by boat, bus, bike, car, on horseback, on foot, and once even by hot air balloon. Here people are logging into the logbook and adding their personal stories about the river. The gathering along the Rio Grande took 5 years, a journey of 1,875 miles through southern Colorado, New Mexico, and along the border between Texas and Mexico. As a result of these actions, a coalition was formed of the upper and lower river basins. This is the Santa Fe Indian School track team running 150 miles as they carried water from the Pueblo of Taos to the Pueblo of Isleta in 2 days. At each pueblo, there was an exchange of river water and a shared meal. The emphasis with each gathering is about process, grassroots, collaborative, and locally based actions. And Sarah Kochian actually was very instrumental in helping to organize this because we had to go through all the northern pueblos to get permission. And we had tribal police who were escorting us along the way. On each project, I work really closely with scientists. This is Dr. Jason Neff, a biogeochemist at the University of Colorado when I was up there working on a project. This is Dr. Kalina Manloyev, and she's a biologist specializing in algae and diatoms, and I'll show you a project that we did together. We create video documentaries, including at sewage treatment plants, because the outflow provides large tributaries into rivers. The outflow from the sewage treatment plant here in Albuquerque provides the 3rd largest tributary to the Rio Grande. So it's a lot. We plant trees. We test water. Here, a hydrologist is taking a sample from the headwaters of Deckers Creek in West Virginia, which is clean and healthy at this site. However, a few miles downstream, we encounter acid mine drainage from an abandoned coal mine. This was really hard as a visual artist for me to see because it was physically as if the river were bleeding. You can see here that the water at the source, the very top one, tested 7.7, and yet at the mine, which 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4th one from the bottom where it said Richard, that's the Richard mine, tested 4.2. So that's not quite battery acid level, but it certainly is not healthy. Backpack repositories are created for each Gathering of Waters project. They are constructed from local materials. This was actually constructed from the floorboards of a church in Albuquerque that was being torn down. It's not particularly comfortable to hike with. Is there anybody here from New Mexico, Game and Fish? Okay, then I can tell you a story. Okay, you'll see up there in kind of on the right-hand side, you see those fish? I'm going to whisper this very quietly. Those are silvery minnows, which are on the endangered species list. That picture of the river that I showed you where it was completely dry, when I was down there, I found all of these dead fish, and I scooped them up. I took them to the biology lab here at the fish lab to have them identified. They were terrified that I had these, because I didn't realize they were dead. I thought, okay, it doesn't matter if I have them, but it does. It's like having a dead eagle in your possession. And I still have some in my freezer at home. So when I showed this picture to a fish biologist, he said, Basia, you cannot have this now is in the collection of the museum in Santa Fe. And they said, you cannot have those in there. So what we did was we took them to the jewelry lab and we had them cast in silver. So I could say I was such a good sculptor that I was able to have them look exactly like the fish. And if you see that fold-out book, and the bottom there, that's a long poem that I wrote about the silvery minnow, that we inked the fish and actually used them that way. So we were trying to destroy the evidence that we actually had them. So each repository holds data, photographs, watershed maps, clay samples, water tests, a canteen, a logbook, the video documentary, and art objects. This was the one that was constructed along Boulder Creek in Colorado using beaver sticks and an old truck inner tube because that is the preferred method of transport along the creek. The Nisqually River in Washington, built using local cedar, smells really good. Kit for paddling through stars floating on a lake in Quebec. I was canoeing every morning and the paddles were in really bad shape, so I decided that I would actually carve my own. They're carved out of linden wood. It's also called lime wood. A seed repository for the Big Wood River in Idaho made from an old fishing vest that was gifted to me. And this is the Oconee River in Georgia, where I worked with a biologist that I showed you, whose research focused on algae. So this is an algae collection kit. This backpack is modeled after a navicula, which is a diatom that's in the shape of a boat. Apothecary for creeks and other living beings, made in Ohio. This piece is really fun to wear because it makes all the glass vials that have the seeds in them hit against each other, so you get this nice rhythmic sound. The Saskatchewan River Delta Repository. Where's Babs? She said, there she is. When I sent the invitation to her, she wrote me back and she said, oh my God, because this was on one of the invitations that went out. She said, oh my gosh, my back hurts looking at that piece. It's actually not all that heavy. At least at the beginning, it was not all that heavy because the red willow that we used is very lightweight. But then, of course, we started putting all of the data and the photographs and the maps and everything in it from the research from that area. We also worked with a local tribe very closely, and they actually helped to construct this also. There are usually hundreds of people involved who assist with these projects, and as a form of reciprocity, it is important for me to give back. So each person is presented with a handmade gift relating to their particular river. These were the gifts that we made for Boulder Creek, because if any of you have ever been to Boulder, you know that everybody there bicycles. And so these are bicycle inner tubes. And they're actually done almost like origami. There's no glue or staples or anything. And if you see, it's a little hard to see in this picture, but there are two images side by side. One is the Arapahoe Glacier a few years ago and the way it is now. It's melting a lot. I'll talk about glaciers in a minute. These were the gifts that we did for the Rio Grande. They were made out of clay that was collected along the entire length of the river. And sometimes even the community helps to make the gifts. They always include watershed maps, and they also always include seeds. Hydrolibros are hand-carved wooden books coated with earth and natural materials. We are this river of turquoise flowing to the sea. We are the water pent up behind a dam. We are the language of salmon bones in the night sky. Each of us is a book of drought. And we are a barnacle-encrusted volume studied intently by Darwin. And I thought I'd just put in one image of my outdoor studio. I try as much as possible to work outdoors by rivers as often as I can, and not to be indoors in a studio. Ice receding, books receding, emphasizes the necessity of collective effort, scientific knowledge, and poetic intervention to deal with the complex issues of climate disruption and watershed restoration through the release of seed-laden ephemeral ice sculptures into rivers. As we all know, glaciers are disappearing around the world. The Nisqually Glacier on Mount Rainier in Washington State has receded drastically up the mountain. When it disappears, so will the Nisqually River, to which it gives birth. So I spent a lot of time on Mount Rainier and with this glacier, and did so many video projects about this, because I really liked physically that I could see that this glacier was birthing this river. It was so visible. And that, by the way, is called the tongue of the glacier, which I really like because it relates back to our own bodies. I work closely with stream ecologists and botanists to decide the best seeds for each particular riparian zone. There's deep community involvement in the entire process, with hundreds of local citizens participating in an educational experience to learn firsthand about their watershed. These ice books, some weighing as much as 300 pounds, have found their way into rivers around the world. So this was the one for Boulder Creek, along the Rio Grande in New Mexico, with cottonwood words. In Belgium, the Netherlands, in France, in Quebec, Canada. And this was a really fun project to work on. This was done in Iran, and I did not go over there. This was a group of environmental women artists who got in touch with me and said that they wanted to create some of these ice books. So we worked via Skype so that I could teach them how to do this. It also cut down on my footprint because it meant that I was not flying off to the other side of the world. And I do that a lot, so this felt good to do. But they were wonderful, and the books that they created were really good. The seeds form an international ecological language, a riparian text. And for those of you in the audience who are scholars, now you have a new way to write your footnotes using riparian grass seeds. Here, Cleo is intently studying the words on this book. The ice books are placed into rivers with the help of local communities into which I'm invited. Sometimes we launch the books from kayaks, which is really fun. So I want to take a moment to discuss the notion of ephemerality. Translator David Hinton describes ancient Chinese poets who, as a form of spiritual practice, would write on rocks and trees with water-soluble ink that would wash away in the rain. So the poem was complete only when it vanished. This is how I feel about the ice books. Because people ask me all the time, they say, Basia, you put so much energy and effort into carving these, why don't you make them out of marble or out of wood? The whole purpose of these is that they're ephemeral, time-based sculptures and that they disappear. This is also how I feel about our own lives. Each of us is only on this earth for a short period of time. And it's wondrous indeed to embrace the ephemerality of our own existence. As I've said already, all of my projects are co-created with communities into which I'm invited. So this was some of the people along the Rio Grande. The museum had sponsored me, the Albuquerque Museum, and so they hired several busloads of buses to take the people down to the river. This was along the Oconee River in Georgia and along the Great Miami River in Ohio. And what we're doing here, since I do believe that rivers are alive, we're toasting the river, not with wine, but with water. And what we're saying is, may you flow, and may you always flow clean. Stream ecologist, river restoration biologist, and botanist help to ascertain the best seeds for each specific riparian zone. So if you can just read this with me quickly, these are some of the beneficial things that plants do for rivers. They sequester carbon, they mitigate floods and drought, pollinate other plants, disperse seeds, create soil regeneration and preservation, act as filters for pollutants and debris, supply leaf litter for food and habitat. I have a friend who teaches up in Washington State, and she, at Evergreen, and she actually did her PhD thesis on leaf litter. So we may not think it's particularly important, but it is very important to the fish who use leaf litter for habitat and also for food. The plants hold the banks in place to slow erosion and provide shelter shade for riverside organisms, including us. So this text perhaps looks similar to Urdu or maybe Arabic. Nada is in the audience and she teaches Arabic here. But it is created using the mountain mahogany seed. So this is the seed, and to me, I could talk for hours just about the seeds that I use. So I'm just going to literally talk about this one because I find it quite amazing as a small, tiny little sculpture that has all of this knowledge embedded within it. It falls, and a lot of you, especially if you're hiking in the Sandias, these are all over. So the seeds fall to the ground, they wait for there to be moisture, and then they literally drill themselves into the soil. I have worked for many years conducting research and producing art projects about waterborne diseases, and received a grant with the chair of biology here, Dr. Sam Locher, to create a video, Bilharzia Blues, an integrated artistic biological approach to schistosomiasis in Egypt, Ethiopia, and Nepal. In Nepal, I collaborated with parasitologists to research the ecology of the schistosomes, which are infecting not only the local populace, but also the elephants in the Rapti River region, which I showed you that picture of that wonderful elephant before. And Dr. Alak Bohara is here. He is from Nepal, and he was very helpful before I went over there when Dr. Locher and I had that grant so that he could help. So has anybody in the audience ever had Giardia? Aha, I saw you smiling. It's like, yep. So this is funny. So there are almost always, when I ask that question, almost always people in the audience who have had Giardia. I happened to get mine when I was in Indonesia on a Fulbright. You do not have to go to Indonesia. It's rampant here in New Mexico and in Colorado. It's called beaver fever because it's often spread through the feces of beaver. So this really started my interest in waterborne diseases. I started going over to the medical library and looking at the parasitology atlases, which were huge, and they had these beautiful images. I'm always really interested in this idea of a terrible beauty, things that are really awful and really terrible, and yet have embedded within them a kind of beauty. So what appears here to be maybe a fertile field that a drone is flying over is actually a tissue sample embedded with Giardia. So waterborne diseases kill a person somewhere in the world every 8 seconds. If you think of how long I've been up here talking, multiply that by how many seconds and how many people have already died. And they're usually preventable. These diseases are usually preventable. So I create scrolls using local fabric with enlarged images of the parasites. We all know how deadly cholera has been around the world. In 2010, after the earthquake in Haiti, it's hard for me to wrap my head around these numbers. 800,000 people got sick with cholera and 9,000 people died. This is Dr. Prem Buddha, a parasitologist with whom I worked in Nepal. His lab was in Kathmandu. And this is what we were looking at through the microscope. We were collecting elephant dung and then studying it to see whether or not the elephants had schisto, and indeed they did. So this is what schistosomiasis looks like. This is my one sexy image that I'm going to show you. These are copulating schistosomes. So you have the male embedded within the female. I collaborate with musicians around the world. In Kathmandu, we wrote songs in Nepalese about how to avoid contracting bilharzia. And in Ethiopia, we composed songs about schistosomiasis that were taken taken out into the local communities and sung in Amharic. I'm really interested in this mode of education because in so many communities around the world that do not read or write, everyone loves song. And Rahim Al-Hajj is here in the audience. And if you've ever had the opportunity to hear him sing about the various social and political situations around the world, it always brings me to tears every time I hear him sing. So song is really important in all of our lives. And writing these songs and then taking them out into the local communities, these are sung in their local languages, which is, again, really important. This, by the way, Lake Tana, most of us are familiar with the White Nile, but the Blue Nile begins in Ethiopia. And this was, John and I did this amazing trek to the source of the Blue Nile. I loved being there. So I've been showing you work outdoors. I thought I'd take you indoors just for a couple of minutes. This was a retrospective that I had in the Netherlands 2 years ago. If any of you read Dutch. So I was talking about the waterborne disease scrolls. This was, we painted the walls blue in here. The scrolls on the right-hand side were created when I was in India, primarily in Rajasthan and Gujarat. And in India, the women can take their saris, which they wear, and fold them over a number of times and use those as a water filter. It doesn't filter out all of the small particles, but it filters out a lot of the large particles. So these scrolls were made using sari silk. And what I like about these pieces is that they're very lightweight because they roll up, they go into these tubes that I have. So I can send off an entire show of these in a very small box, whereas most of my work I cannot. The images of the ice books were enlarged and printed in Belgium. This is just 2 of the walls. This went around the entire length of the, so this was one of the galleries that had some of the backpack repositories in it. This installation is entitled Icefield. Here we see a laboratory setting with all that is left of the glaciers to study is meltwater. Glaciers will have disappeared in the future, and scientists can only examine their remains in test tubes and beakers. We created a reflecting pool with stepping stones and suspended salt boats. I've never had such an amazing experience working with either a gallery or a museum because anything that I dreamt that I wanted to do, they said yes. So I said, I want to put a reflecting pool in the museum. They hired 8 preparators to build this. So I want you to look at the very back. I am sitting in a sculpture which is called a contemplation station. This was the only one that was indoors. We built 7 of these, and they were designed to go beside rivers. So there was a map inside the museum that showed where these were, but the idea really was that people could walk along the river and simply discover them on their own, which was really fun. One of the curators took this picture of this woman who had just discovered it. This station was used on the cover last year of a magazine called The Environment. It's a magazine for the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management that is published in the UK. So I thought I'd introduce you to my 2 books. Some of you have received this book, which is Water Library. It was published by UN Press in 2007. And then in 2017, Reading the River, the Ecological Activist Art of Basia Irland was published in the Netherlands. I have been incredibly fortunate the last 3 years to have been invited by Sandra Postel, the director and founder of the Global Water Policy Project, to blog for National Geographic about international rivers. These essays are written in the first person from the perspective of the river, and I only write about rivers that I've had the opportunity to visit, to hang out with, to fall in love with, to get to know intimately. The 3 examples I will discuss here focus on indigenous water rights. I am the Yaqui River in Mexico, polluted with noxious pesticide runoff from large agricultural businesses upstream. I witness poor families forced to purchase drinking water since none is available within the homes. This is a necessity that should be free and a given right for each person. I am the Nisqually River in Washington State, where decades of legal battles led to one of the most important Indian laws ever passed. The bold decision affirms Nisqually off-reservation fishing rights. I am the Narmada River in India, where pilgrims walk barefoot and carry all their worldly possessions as they circumambulate my entire body in a 2 to 3 year journey of over 1,600 miles. However, my natural flow is blocked at the Sardar Sarabar Dam, one of the largest in the world, where my reservoir has displaced over 1 million Adivasi, or original inhabitants of the region, mostly poor indigenous tribal people whose entire culture and livelihood are at stake. Rainwater harvesting projects have been created around campus as a way to bring awareness to our high desert arid environment. So some of you will know this area. This is behind the Syria building here at UNM. It houses the Biology Museum. This was what it looked like, and it had been slated to have grass put in, which is highly water intensive. So I went to the subcontractor and I asked if I could take over this project, and they said yes. So, and the reason for this was because the water, there are troughs up above the walkway there, and all that water was simply falling onto the sidewalk. So this was the beginning of the process, putting in all local native plants, and we put in this swale to catch the rainwater to feed the xeric plants. So this is what that area looks like today. This is one of the interesting things that I love about doing outdoor work. I felt that it was really important to put in a bench, so we put in this one bench so people could just go sit quietly. So a number of years ago, one of my colleagues in the art department called and said, "Basia, I want you to come over and have a look at this." So someone, I have no idea who, had put in this rock bench guest log. And it was for people to write their experiences of sitting on this bench. And I think one of the things this showed me was just that there are very few places on campus where you can sit quietly and just meditate between classes. So this was the other thing. It said, "Need a break?" Sounds like a beer commercial. But I was really pleased. You know, my name is not on this, so nobody had any way of knowing who created this. but I was really happy to see that a student or somebody had just decided they were going to create this. Made me really happy. So this is the roof of the Pueblo of Isleta Recreation Center. And we were, Dr. Beverly Singer, who used to teach in anthropology, who's from the Pueblo of Santa Clara, and I did this project together. So you can see here that the downspouts from the roof were simply taking the water out to the parking lot. So they constantly flooded the parking lot. Because that roof is so enormous, you can imagine the amount of rain that it catches. So we worked with the community there at Isleta, especially the kids from the local school. It was really fun working with all of them. So this was what we did. The one on the right hasn't been redirected yet, but the one on the left, we simply redirected the downspout into some rock swales so that it could nourish the local plants. We put in a series of tiles that had tribal words for water. And then we put in a tank, a water tank, and the kids from the school designed and painted this. There's Beverly, who was filming the kids. There were a lot of other things that we did. We also made an indoor mural based on a Santa Clara poem that is still in the rec center today. So this, if we could look right outside, out there, this is the site by the Student Union building over there, before the Xeric rainwater garden was installed. And this was really interesting to me because, and I learned a good lesson. I went to the contractor and I didn't ask him, are you putting in any kind of downspouts or way to educate the university about rainwater harvesting? I said, oh, and by the way, where are the rainwater harvesting projects going? And so I was given this area to work with. So this was what it looked like before. And this is what it looks like now. Well, it's not quite this way now because when they were redesigning the plaza area out there, a lot of the plants got taken. They did leave all the words and all that stuff, but a lot of it got taken out. Some of the landscaping that we had done got taken out. So it does not look particularly good these days. So hopefully all the plants will come back. So there's a tile that said harvested on the roof. Scarce rainfall flows into a subterranean drip system. Overflow circles the Xeric fragrance garden in a stone swale and then drains to the Rio Grande. So there's 63 international words for water there. When we were building this and we were working on it, there were these two engineering students who came by and they stood there for the longest time. And finally I went up and started talking to them and they went over by this word, which was the Swahili word that they speak in their village back home. And they said how grateful they were because it helped make them feel at home on a campus where nobody else spoke Swahili. And then this was one of my favorite students. This was Gabe, who's signing the word for water. So I'll end this talk with just a few more images. I was commissioned by the Albuquerque Museum to create a fountain, but I refused because I would have had to use groundwater and potable water for that. As you know, there are times when the governor in New Mexico requests all outdoor fountains for the water to be turned off because we're in drought situations. So I had to completely rethink this, and about a month later, I called the director of the museum back and I said, would you allow me to put a stock tank on the roof of the museum? And much to my surprise, he said yes. So here we are installing the work. The water flows from the tank to a set of cast bronze arms, which are modeled after my own arms. So the water drips from one hand to the next and then outside the museum to water plants. The only time this fountain works is when there has been moisture, thereby making the ecosystem where we live visible. So it's funny because it'll start raining and all. Friends will call and they'll say, Basia, I'm heading down to the museum because the fountain will be working. In this radically interconnected world, it becomes our collective responsibility to compassionately take care of each other and our environment. It is our responsibility to ensure that the next generations will have enough clean water, not only to survive, but to thrive. I will end with a quote from my friend Dar Jamal's book, The End of Ice. From this moment on, knowing what is happening to the planet, to what do I devote my life? Thank you.